She was a princess, beloved and protected. But in a moment of deception, her world collapsed. Her own brother had betrayed her. Her father, the mighty King David, had refused to act. And so, Tamar faded into the shadows. But was she truly lost? Welcome to Mindful Musing, a journey with God, where faith comes alive, and every story reminds us that the God of yesterday is still the God of today. Here, we dive deep into the untold wonders of Scripture, immersive, emotional, powerful. Stories that stir your spirit, ignite your faith, and draw you closer to the heart of God. Subscribe now and join the journey, as we step into one of the most astonishing moments in all of biblical history. The palace of King David was alive with music and murmured conversations, a place where power whispered through corridors draped in rich tapestries, and the scent of myrrh and incense lingered in the air. Tamar moved gracefully through the halls, her embroidered robes flowing around her like rippling water. She had always been told she was beautiful, one of the fairest daughters of the king, blessed with a presence that turned heads, a softness that inspired awe. Her beauty was not just seen, it was known. She was more than a daughter, she was a symbol. Royal blood coursed through her veins, marking her as a princess of Israel, a vessel of legacy and expectation. She had been raised with dignity, trained in the art of hospitality, and groomed for the day she would be given in marriage, not for love, but for alliance. Tamar understood the weight of such a role. She was not meant for ordinary things. Her future was grand, predetermined by the whispers of the court and the careful calculations of her father's advisors. One day, she would be wed to strengthen a bond between nations, to secure peace, to expand David's influence. She had accepted this fate without resistance. She had never known fear within the palace walls. Until the shadows lurking behind them began to stir. The growing tension. Tamar did not notice it at first. Amnon had always been her brother, a presence she did not question, a son of David, like so many others who walked the halls. She had no reason to fear him, no reason to doubt the safety of their familial bond. But Amnon noticed her. He had watched her too closely, lingered too long when she entered the room. His words were careful, his gaze sharp, filled with something unspoken. A hunger. A longing. Something dangerous. Tamar was oblivious, caught in the rhythms of palace life, unaware that she was no longer just his sister in his eyes. Unaware that her place in David's kingdom had become the center of Amnon's desires. And soon, the walls of her sanctuary would crumble. Soon, the world she knew would be shattered. But that moment had not arrived yet. For now, she still belonged to a world where she was cherished, where she was safe. For now, Tamar remained untouched. But for how long? The palace had always felt safe. Tamar had never questioned its walls, its corridors draped in gold and history, its people who whispered and watched but never threatened. She belonged to something greater, the house of a king, the bloodline of David himself. But safety is an illusion. And betrayal, when it comes, moves in silence. Amnon's sickness was sudden. His voice trembled when he spoke of it, his face pale, his hands shaking as he lay upon his bed in isolation. "I am unwell," he murmured to those who visited. Weak. Fading. The news spread quickly through the palace. A prince was ill. A son of David lay in suffering. But when the king himself came to see him, Amnon did not ask for healers. He did not ask for remedies or prayers. Instead, he made a single request. "Send Tamar to me," he said. "Let her prepare food for me with her own hands, so that I might regain my strength." There was no reason to deny him. Tamar was his sister. A daughter of the same royal house, raised in the same halls, a presence of warmth and kindness. She had always cared for others, had always been taught to serve those in need. And so, David sent her. The order was innocent. The danger remained unseen. Tamar's innocence. Tamar arrived without hesitation. She carried trays of flour and oil, the ingredients needed to bake bread, and the gentle smile of a sister devoted to her family's well-being. She stepped into Amnon's chambers without fear, her sandals barely making a sound against the stone floor. He lay upon the bed, his breath shallow, his limbs unmoving. She did not question his weakness, did not notice the glint of something unreadable in his eyes. She simply served. Her hands moved with practiced care, kneading the dough, pressing it into form, placing it upon the fire. The scent of warm bread filled the chamber, curling through the air like a promise of healing, of renewal. When it was ready, she approached him. "Eat, my brother," she said, her voice soft with kindness. But Amnon did not reach for the food. He reached for her. Before she could move, before she could react, Amnon's grip tightened around her wrist. "Tamar," he whispered. "Stay with me." She frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "I will serve you, my brother," she said gently. "But let me go." But he did not let go. His hands, once trembling with false weakness, were now steady, firm, unyielding. Something was wrong. Tamar knew it now. She felt it in the way the walls seemed to close in the way his breath came faster, in the way his body shifted beneath the sheets as he pulled her closer. "Come and lie with me," he said. Her world shattered. "No, my brother," she pleaded, panic rising in her chest. "Do not do this. Such a thing should never be done in Israel, do not bring this disgrace upon me." She fought. She resisted. She begged for reason, pleaded for mercy, grasped for anything that would stop the horror that was unfolding. But Amnon did not listen. He did not care. And Tamar, the cherished daughter, the princess of David's house, lost everything behind closed doors. Tamar did not run. She stumbled, her hands trembling, her breath uneven, but she did not flee the way one might expect, did not scream through the halls, did not claw at the walls in desperation. Instead, she collapsed. Her voice, once soft with kindness, was broken with anguish. Her trembling fingers reached for the rich embroidery of her robe, the symbol of her royal lineage, her purity, her honor, and with a sharp, choked cry, she tore it apart. Rags now hung from her body, the bright colors of royalty reduced to ruin. Ashes filled her hands, and she pressed them to her head, her face, her skin that had once been untouched. She had lost everything. Tamar did not suffer in silence. She did not bow her head and accept her fate as though it had been inevitable. She cried out. She pleaded for justice, for someone to acknowledge the horror that had taken place behind closed doors. She called upon the laws of Israel, the sacred commands that forbade such wickedness. But the palace walls did not answer. Her tears fell upon stone floors, heard only by the servants who had watched in helpless horror, seen only by the empty corridors that swallowed her grief whole. No one came to help her. Not even her father. When the news reached David, he was furious. His daughter had been violated. His son had committed a crime so vile that it should have demanded punishment, demanded swift action, demanded the weight of justice upon the guilty. But David did nothing. He raged, his hands clenched into fists, his voice sharp with fury, but he did not act. He did not send Amnon away. He did not demand restitution for Tamar. The great warrior, the righteous king, the man who had faced giants and conquered nations, stood silent in the face of his daughter's suffering. And Tamar was left abandoned. Amnon had taken what he wanted. And now he wanted nothing from Tamar. His lust had turned to disgust, his obsession now warped into hatred. "Get up," he snapped. "Go away." Tamar stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "This evil is worse than what you have already done," she whispered. "Do not send me away." But he did not listen. He had destroyed her dignity. And now he discarded her as though she had never mattered. The door to his chamber swung open, and the guards dragged her out. The palace had swallowed her whole. And silence reigned where justice should have stood. The door slammed behind her. Tamar stood still for a moment, her breath shallow, her hands clutching the ruined fabric of her torn robe. She had always believed the palace was a place of safety, a sanctuary for the daughters of the king. But now, the halls whispered of shame, the marble floors echoed her disgrace. She was no longer Tamar, the cherished princess of Israel. She was Tamar, the abandoned daughter. The world around her had not changed, gold still lined the corridors, servants still bustled from room to room, voices still hummed through the palace walls. But everything had changed for her. She was invisible now. Forgotten. Unspoken. No one rushed to her aid. No one called for justice. And so, she walked. Her feet carried her through the winding paths beyond the palace gates, past the watchful guards who did not stop her, past the marketplace where voices rose in barter and laughter, past the streets where no one looked at her long enough to truly see. She walked until the grand walls of the city faded behind her. Until only one house remained before her, her brother Absalom's house. Tamar barely noticed when her brother stepped forward to greet her. His face was unreadable, his voice low as he looked upon her ruined garments, the ashes staining her skin, the grief carved into the lines of her face. "Did Amnon harm you?" he asked. The words felt hollow, like something spoken for confirmation, not for comfort. Tamar did not answer. She did not need to. The truth was written all over her. Absalom sighed, his expression tightening, his jaw clenched. There was a storm beneath his skin, something quiet but dangerous, something that burned with more intensity than his words would allow. But he did not rage. He did not demand justice. Instead, his voice was calm when he spoke again. "Be silent, my sister," he said. "He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." Tamar did not flinch at his words. She simply lowered her gaze. No protest. No argument. She had no strength left to fight. And so, she entered his house, letting the silence swallow her whole. Days turned into weeks. Weeks stretched into months. Tamar did not return to the palace. She remained under Absalom's roof, living not as the daughter of a king but as a woman cast aside, forgotten and forsaken. No messenger arrived with news that justice had been served. No decree was sent condemning Amnon. Her father remained silent. David, the mighty king, the man after God's own heart, the man who had written songs of righteousness, had danced before the Lord in joy, had ruled with wisdom, did nothing. And the silence roared louder than the injustice itself. The laws of Israel should have demanded action. Her father's fury should have been enough to bring consequences. But no one spoke of Tamar now. She was a shadow lingering in the house of her brother, her sorrow untold, her suffering unseen. Justice had been swallowed whole. And Tamar had been left behind. Where is God in suffering? She used to pray. She used to believe that God saw all things, that he heard the cries of his people, that he did not turn away from those who were broken. But days passed. And nothing changed. She was still abandoned. She was still forgotten. Had the heavens remained as silent as the halls of the palace? Had God seen what had happened to her, and chosen not to act? She thought of the stories told throughout Israel, the tales of deliverance, of mercy, of miracles. She thought of Hagar, the woman who had fled into the wilderness only to be met by the presence of God, the God who saw, the God who named her suffering and acknowledged her existence. Was that same God watching now? Or had he turned away? She did not know the answer. She only knew the weight of silence. And it was suffocating. Time did not heal Tamar. It did not erase what had been done. Her name remained in the pages of Scripture, recorded as the daughter of David, as the woman Amnon had violated, as the sister Absalom sheltered. But after this moment, Tamar never spoke again. She was never mentioned beyond this tragedy. No restoration. No redemption. Only exile. Only silence. The forgotten daughter. But some stories demand remembrance. Some voices, even when silenced, still shape history. And Tamar's story, though cut short, would not be erased. The silence did not last forever. For years, Tamar's suffering had been swallowed whole, buried beneath the weight of royal indifference. The palace had moved on. David had ruled. The affairs of the kingdom had unfolded without pause. But Absalom had never forgotten. And he had never forgiven. Absalom's vengeance. The hatred grew slowly, like embers smoldering beneath dry wood, waiting for the right moment to ignite. Absalom did not rage. He did not shout or demand retribution in front of the court. Instead, he watched. He waited. For 2 years, he played the role of a dutiful son, a loyal prince. He stood beside David, spoke with measured words, gave no indication that beneath his skin, vengeance had taken root. And then, when the moment was right, when no one suspected treachery, he struck. He arranged a feast, a gathering for his brothers, a celebration for the sons of David. An invitation Amnon could not refuse. Wine flowed. Laughter spilled through the halls of Absalom's estate. And when the air was thick with ease, when Amnon's guard was down, the command was given. Absalom's servants moved swiftly. Blades flashed. And before the echoes of laughter could fade, Amnon was dead. The aftermath was chaos. Word reached David, and grief consumed the palace like wildfire. It was a second tragedy. The first had been Tamar's disgrace, the wound that had never healed, the injustice that had never been answered. Now, Absalom had forced justice with his own hands. And blood had paid for blood. David wept for Amnon. He mourned the son he had never punished, the son who had violated his daughter but had still remained his own flesh and blood. But his mourning was not just for Amnon. It was for everything Tamar's tragedy had broken. The royal household had splintered, David's sons turning against each other, vengeance replacing justice, exile replacing reconciliation. Absalom had done what his father never had. He had avenged Tamar, had restored some semblance of justice when David had chosen silence. But was it justice? Or was it simply revenge? Tamar never spoke of Amnon's death. She did not rejoice. She did not weep. She had lost everything 2 years ago, her voice, her place, her identity. Amnon's fate did not change what had happened to her. Justice had come too late. The weight of his crime had already crushed her spirit. His death could not undo it. Absalom had spilled blood, had answered silence with violence, had forced a reckoning upon the house of David. But what had it truly cost? The kingdom was fractured. David's grief was doubled. And Tamar remained lost in the echoes of what could have been. True justice is restoration, redemption, not vengeance. And Tamar never found it. She was forgotten. Her voice faded from history. Her name became nothing more than a passing memory, a shadow within the house of David. A daughter forsaken. A kingdom torn apart. A justice that came too late. Tamar never spoke again. The last words she uttered were pleas, for justice, for mercy, for dignity. But after that final rejection, after silence swallowed her whole, Scripture never recorded her voice again. And yet, her story remained. Her name was not erased from the pages of history. She was not lost in time or forgotten among kings and warriors. She stood among the shadows, among those who suffered, among those whose cries were never answered, a testimony to brokenness, injustice, and the weight of silence. Tamar's fate was not a triumphant one. There was no redemption arc, no grand restoration, no miracle that reversed the suffering she endured. But her presence in Scripture is itself a rebellion against the silence that tried to erase her. Her story reminds us that pain exists. That injustice can go unanswered. That the broken do not always find their healing in this life. But it also reminds us of remembrance. Of the weight of telling the truth, of carrying the voices of those who were silenced, of ensuring that suffering is not ignored. She stands as a warning. As a memory. As a voice that, even though lost, still speaks. Her story asks a question that cannot be ignored. What is justice when it comes too late? Absalom sought vengeance, but it could not undo the damage done. David mourned, but his grief came after his silence had already betrayed his daughter. Tamar teaches that justice is not just punishment, it is action in its right time. It is speaking when speaking is necessary. It is standing when standing is required. It is defending those who cannot defend themselves before they are broken beyond repair. Her story is a challenge to see the unseen, hear the unheard, and refuse to let silence consume the truth. She was a princess once. A daughter who walked the halls of a kingdom with grace and dignity. And then she was nothing, a woman cast aside, left to fade into obscurity. But the pages of Scripture did not let her disappear. She stands among the overlooked, among the broken, among those who suffered in silence. And because her story remains, we remember her. Where do we allow silence to consume truth in our world today? Tamar's story is not often told, but it should be. Carry her voice forward. How do we respond when justice calls? Do we act, or do we hesitate? Some stories demand remembrance. And hers is one that must never be forgotten.